the Australian cricketer Shane Warne has died of a suspected heart attack. I'm joined now in the studio by John Norman, who's TalkSport's cricket correspondent. I mean, John, first of all, we haven't got a huge amount of information, but what do we know?
What we know is that Shane was in Thailand with a very close friend of his and sadly was found unresponsive this morning. There were attempts made to revive him. They weren't successful, and so sadly it does appear that Shane has passed away due to a heart attack, age 52.
I mean, 52 is no age at all, and he's such a big figure. He's one of these cricketers that even if you don't like cricket, you know of Shane Warne, and he did so much. Being a professional poker player before it became cool for ex-sportsmen, stepping out with stars like Elizabeth Hurley. I mean, he was bigger than the game in many ways. For sure.
And I suppose in recent times it's quite unusual for cricketers to essentially transcend the sport in the way that Shane did. It was far more usual, I suppose, during the 80s and the 90s, which is when Shane began playing for Australia. But he continued to dominate the headlines even after he retired as well. So he was still very much a huge presence in popular culture, within the Australian mythology as well, really, in terms of how we view Australians. He was almost the archetype, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, because it wasn't just, the kind of complete competitive package, because he was so competitive.
Yeah.
And, the sort of person that you love if he's on your team and sort of slightly hate if he's on the team
Oh,
against
no,
you,
slightly.
because he would get right in your face.
I don't think there's any slightly about it. As a kid growing up, he was the opposition, and it was an absolute nightmare because he was too good.
Because he was so good, and it was the talent as well, because it wasn't just that he had the attitude, he could absolutely back it up.
To give listeners an idea of just how good he was, in a few years back, the Wisden Cricketer, which is essentially the cricketing Bible, it's released every year and it names its 5 cricketers of the year. It put together its 5 cricketers of the century, okay? And Shane Warne was one of the 5. Now that in itself
gives... Warne, else do we have?
Jack Hobbs, who was pre-World War I and II, played between the wars, scored 100 first-class centuries. Sir Garfield Sobers, arguably the greatest all-rounder of them all. Donald Bradman, the Australian who ended with an average of 99.94. Sir Vivian Richards, who of course is thankfully still with us.
Yeah. And Shane Warne.
Shane Warne. So that's the list.
But the best ever leg break, best ever leg spinner, would you reckon? Better than Miller Lutheran?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, well, Murali was, get technical, Murali was... an off-break bowler, and Warne was a leg break, but they had
bent arm.
But they
had at least Warne didn't have the bent arm.
He didn't, and they had a great rivalry between them. They took 1,600 Test wickets over a 15 to 20 year period. So, I look, Shane Warne was part of arguably the greatest cricket side of all time. Okay, and he played alongside once-in-generation cricketers and once-in-50-year cricketers, from Adam Gilchrist through to Ricky Ponting through to Glenn McGrath. Is great. Bowling teammate. Shane Warne was a once-in-a-100-year cricketer. Simple as that.
I don't think there's anything more that we can say. Look, thank you so much, John, for coming on the show. I mean, it sometimes, do you know what? When Kathy Newman came in earlier, she was like, "Oh, how are you doing today?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, great." But I'm really sad that I've just heard the news about Shane Warne. And sometimes you just hear that and you just go, "Oh, I'm just really sad." And I think there's going to be a lot of people that listen to this show who maybe even aren't the biggest cricket fans in the world that will just think, and especially just so close to Rodney Marsh as well.
Well,
just this two greats just gone.
From obviously with my title being cricket editor at TalkSport, you could imagine that I have a deep-rooted love, a lifelong love of cricket, and it will be. I will always remember where I was when I heard kind of moment.
Well, look, thanks so much for joining us, John.